Guilty Gear Strives Season 3. The story so far.
What makes you unique?
You ain't bad. Time for my secret weapon.
Is this the end or a fake out?
A happy ending happens when the handsome guy wins.
Line up for autographs.
Guilty Gear Strive has had its share of time out in the fighting game market, being almost 3 years old now, and in that time it's been host to a fair share of character balance patches and overall system changes across its various seasons. But for this video, I'll be focusing on Season 3 and its more prominent system changes, how the competitive landscape has been shaped or changed by these as a result, and then top it all off with my thoughts on the current state of the game. With ABBA's release, I think now's a good time to recap the events of Season 3 so far, starting off with how it all began, patch 1.29. Released on August 24th of 2023, Season 3 sought out to provide a second helping of resource management with the addition of two new universal mechanics, the first being Wild Assault, an aggressive, forward-advancing attack that costs 50% of the burst gauge. This mechanic comes in three types depending on your chosen character, each one having various properties, red, blue, and white. I'll be providing more info on this mechanic than what you see on screen in the following chapter of this video, as this mechanic needs to be broken down in greater detail, but we have a lot of other changes to cover before that, so for now we're going to move on to the second universal mechanic, Deflect Shield. Deflect Shield is a defensive mechanic capable of blocking strikes of any type as well as projectiles at the cost of 50% of the burst gauge. After a successful Deflect Shield, the opponent is pushed much further away than the standard methods of blocking. Timing is key though, as the second half of Deflect Shield's animation leaves you in a counter hit state, potentially leading to huge damage taken should your opponent be anticipating it. In addition to these new mechanics, the already existing Blue and Gold Burst saw their share of changes as well. Blue Burst now covers the entire screen and no longer refunds a portion of its cost on hit. Gold Burst no longer grants a full tension gauge on hit, it now grants positive bonus instead. Burst gauge generation has also been adjusted to accommodate these changes. You build burst gauge at a faster rate compared to previous versions, and are also given additional burst meter whenever you trigger positive bonus or are struck to a wall from an opponent's combo. The changes don't end there either. For the first time in the series, character weight values have been equalized across the whole cast. To give a brief explanation, characters had assigned weight groups which affected knockback height and distance. This meant that lighter characters like Bridget or May would be sent flying further and higher when being juggled in midair compared to the larger characters like Potemkin or Gold Lewis. With this change, however, character weight values have all been leveled to that of Sol or Kai, who are seen as the standard weight. Damage was toned down slightly across the cast. The most notable instance of this is seen from the reduced damage that supers do now compared to the previous versions of the game. In addition, special moves that had follow-ups or perhaps better known as Rekkas have a reduced counter hit effect, netting them a less damaging punish. After all this time, Johnny finally joins the roster. A suave ladies man who's no stranger to risky bets, he deals in cards to set up potent mix-up situations. If you blink, you might just miss them. A wave of new special moves are being added to the starting roster of characters in Strive, resulting in changes or improvements to their game plan. Characters also receive their individual share of balance adjustments, but for the sake of brevity, I will not be covering all of them and only noting changes that help push characters into or out of competitive play in this next chapter. With all the changes mentioned in the previous chapter, players had their hands full trying out the new tools they were given, but one mechanic made itself known for how strong it was right away: Red Wild Assault. Red Wild Assault was any Guilty Gear player's dream, as it could do just about anything, converting from pokes in neutral, extending block strings, cranking your opponent's wrist gauge, frame trapping with its charged and uncharged versions, all while taking away a sizable chunk of burst meter from an opponent, effectively locking them out of bursting any immediate combo they run into. Its fully charged version was particularly potent, as it drained even more burst meter, launched grounded opponents, and was easy to combo into from any counter hit poke. Combine all of that utility with damage that could go through the roof, and you'll start to see why this mechanic became a dominant aspect of competitive play. In comparison, the other two types of Wild Assault, blue and white, were not fully able to match the tempo set by their red sibling, but a few characters were still strong enough with or without the use of these new mechanics to reach some level of tournament presence. A good chunk of the cast that had received access to Red Wild Assault had naturally become stronger to some degree, but there was one other common trend amongst some of the heavy hitters in this patch: the access to meterless reversals. It appears as though this new mechanic had helped bridge the gaps in these Shoto-esque characters' kits by giving them more ways to convert from stray hits or extend their pressure on a secondary resource, the burst gauge. This frees up their tension gauge to be used as the situation demands it, whether it be to skip neutral, create a difficult mix-up situation, or challenge pressure with relative safety through the use of these meterless reversals backed up by Roman cancels. These characters have truly become Swiss Army knives with the vast array of tools available to them now. As for individual character changes of note, Happy Chaos receives some simplified inputs during steady aim, enabling smoother inputs and thus reducing the toll on his concentration gauge. Sin received a handful of buffs, too many to cover properly actually, so it's safe to say he's now a playable character compared to his initial release. Nagoriyuki's Kamuriyuki, better known as Beyblade in the Strive community, is now a low. Why is Nago's Beyblade a low? And Zato, well...
Who killed Zato 1?
He had a good run. With that, the highlights of version 1.29 draw to a close, taking us to the mid-season patch 1.33, the current version of the game. The date is now December 8th, and nearly 4 months have passed since the start of the season, meaning it's time for a little mid-season madness, featuring the newest character to join the Strive roster, Elfeld Valentine. Her style of rushdown is sure to drive you madly in love, or just plain mad. Let's see what other goodies this patch has to shake things up. And the shaking starts with some fine-tuning of the new system mechanic, Wild Assault. Each Wild Assault now depletes less of the opponent's burst gauge, and the depleted amount remains the same for both the uncharged and the charged versions. Not only that, but each type of Wild Assault had received some direct changes, which are the following. Red Wild Assault now has more damage scaling, reducing the damage dealt when using it in combos, and the startup of the charged version has been increased as well, reducing its overall combo potential. Blue Wild Assault now leaves the opponent closer on hit or block, and has an increased guard crush duration, allowing for more dangerous mix-up situations. White Wild Assault now has increased movement speed and reach, allowing its user to really stick to the opponent in neutral. On to Deflect Shield. This mechanic was a bit confusing to use on release, largely due to the pushback on a successfully deflected attack being very different depending on what specific move was deflected. As of this patch though, the distance is now consistent for all moves, making it easier for players to understand and use the mechanic. Positive bonus has gotten a shortened duration, with the intent of reducing the total amount of burst gauge given to a player during this state. The overall amount of tension gauge you gain from positive bonus remains the same. This also keeps certain block string loops during positive bonus on a tighter leash as a result. Aside from this, more special moves were added to members of the original roster, with more still on the way. More character balance changes dropped as well. Happy Chaos got some heavy nerfs to the concentration cost of firing bullets, and the guard crush effect from shooting during steady aim has been reduced. Asuka's cubes were slowed down and given thicker hurt boxes so it's easier to punch them. Goat Lewis gained a better crouching kick, crouching slash, and close slash. Chip and Anji both retain momentum from their Rekka starters, allowing them to advance forward with their low follow-ups from further distances. We call these the discount stun dipper. Anji also received a major change to his low follow-up, Nagiha, and is now able to combo off of it without any meter. Johnny can now jump cancel during the startup of his step dash, letting him keep that forward momentum in midair and cover more distance than a regular jump. And those are just a few of the changes. For more information, I highly encourage you to look through the patch notes for the full list of changes made to the cast, which I've linked in the description. Well, now that we have an idea of how much has changed with this update, we have to ask ourselves, how has this affected tournament play? We talked a lot about Red Wild Assault when highlighting patch 1.29, so of course we have to comment on it here as well. Now that it takes away less burst gauge on hit or block than the previous patch, it has become possible for defenders to gain access to burst during an opponent's Wild Assault strings, allowing more opportunities to halt their opponent's momentum. The added startup to charged Wild Assault and the increased damage scaling helped immensely as well, since this mechanic had given characters access to new conversions, which subsequently meant they were able to dish out more damage in places which were previously impossible. Despite these changes, however, this version of Wild Assault is still quite strong, just not as mandatory to be playing a red Wild Assault character. Now the question is, where does this leave the other two Wild Assault types? With the community's prayers for red Wild Assault nerfs being heard, the resulting power vacuum left room for another contender to try and take its place: White Wild Assault. For context, let's look at the cast of characters who have access to White Wild Assault. They can all be described as having restricted or unorthodox movement properties on top of a larger body, making it difficult for them to close the distance to an opponent. This is meant to be offset by the threat that these characters might present once they've reached you. With these characteristics in mind, it would seem a bit silly to add a mechanic that helps close the distance between both players while being plus on block and acting as an invincible reversal after its first 9 frames of startup. Well, that's why Wild Assault. An effective solution to a core weakness of the big body archetype, White Wild Assault received a buff that pushed its strike hitbox forward, making it very easy to get this move to connect with an opponent, and begin applying or extending pressure. While the addition of this mechanic is a net positive to every character that has access to it, the mileage gained off of it varies. The greatest example of this is shown with the character Gold Lewis Dickinson, whose onslaught of Behemoth Typhoons has been made more consistently accessible now, meaning more chip damage and more damage opportunities for the character overall. Couple this with the buffs he gained to his crouching kick startup, his close slash, his forward movement, and you can start to see how this character currently has enough ingredients to cook in this season. While the changes to Blue Wild Assault were quite solid, it's not really strong enough on its own merits to set itself apart from its red and white siblings. This hasn't stopped characters like Milia from rising up in tournament strength, however, since the additional resources spend means more opportunities to run continuous mix-ups and really snowball should the opponent be unable to escape. Both very strong qualities to have in the current meta. Alpheld Valentine and Johnny are both just a little on the weak side this season, as their kits have some rather exploitable weaknesses or counterplay, while also having a rather volatile matchup spread, resulting in them being inconsistent characters for tournament play. This mid-season patch did manage to shake up the high end of the meta overall. The nerfs to Happy Chaos helped put the brakes on his streak of tournament dominance compared to previous seasons. Gold Lewis has risen up with the changes to both Red and White Wild Assault, and some previous underdog picks like Anji and Milia have been seeing more and more consistent tournament presence. And with that, we are all caught up with what's been going on in Season 3 of Guilty Gear Strive, right up to ABBA's release. This season has definitely been one that's led to a lot of balanced discussion topics within the community compared to previous ones, which I think is only natural with all the new system mechanics, character adjustments, and new special moves added, bringing plenty of things to talk about, which is not necessarily a bad thing at all really. In my opinion, this has been one of the more balanced states the game has been in throughout its lifespan, as I'd always felt like the previous seasons had 3 untouchable god type of characters and 4 demigods who could make them work for their wins. I'd say we have about 14 characters that can tackle major tournament events and see some success, and this is possibly due to how the new mechanics, namely Wild Assault, have allowed characters with previously shaky win conditions to be able to access them much more consistently, pushing the meta towards being more snowbally with these extra resources to manage. That's about all I've got to say for this video. I hope you all enjoyed it. If it's not too much trouble, I'd appreciate leaving a like or comment, since the algorithm really likes that sort of stuff, and it helps me grow my channel. Thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you all for my next upload. Bye bye!